point, he wanted to say some things about tag. This is the only tag thing I want to do just for Beacon. Just not in the mood for the tag stuff today. Go ahead, Beacon. What's up?
Oh, hey. Yeah, so, again, thank you for giving me your time. I know it's valuable, and I appreciate it.
Sure.
So can I ask, like, 2 quick questions before I give the objection/question, just to make sure I don't strawman you?
Sure.
Okay, so the form of tag is if X, then Y, right?
No.
Okay. So the argument isn't that if universals exist, then they must be grounded in the mind of God?
Well, that's just one way to go about showing that you have to ground abstract categories. The form of the argument is X is the necessary condition, X is the necessary condition of Y, Y, therefore X. So that's just showing what a precondition is or a transcendental category, right? It's just a formal way to say that if I'm going to have knowledge, there are certain things that have to be the case to have knowledge. I have knowledge, therefore those other things are the case.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I often hear you employ the argument that atheists have no justification for universals.
Yeah.
And that there's no way to be certain of their existence through personal experience or all that stuff.
Well, that came up with the debate 2 days ago. Did you see that debate with Yaron Brook?
I think I only watched... Oh, yeah. It was with the guy who was arguing for Ayn Rand and all that.
Yeah, actually, right? The universals, this very point, actually did come up in that debate, yes.
Okay, yeah. So, well, I had a specific question about that.
Okay.
So, if tag does require you to say that, knowledge and truth exists as a universal, and the reason that God must exist is because if you concede that knowledge exists, then that universal has to be grounded in a divine mind. Aren't you presupposing like universals without giving like a justification of them, because you're kind of like using sense experience to say that knowledge exists?
Yeah, but our point is that everybody makes those presuppositions. There is no presuppositionless position. So that's why the argument is not you can't justify things in like an evidentialist way. Justification occurs in a holistic worldview way. That's the whole point of the argument, is to move away from the idea that there's anything that's self-evident or anything that is not theory-laden. If everything is theory-laden, then the only way that we could go about arguing these types of positions, which are arguments about entire paradigms, is precisely by comparing the two paradigms.
Okay. And so if everybody assumes these when they like engage in debate, mm-hmm. and like if you're saying that everybody assumes them in some verbal argumentation philosophical sense, and you have to assume them to question their existence.
Well, I think you have to assume them also, to not just verbally, but you have to assume that they are the case. Metaphysically, not just verbally.
Okay, so but why is it such that if something is axiomatic to engage in debate, that it must be true or even universally true?
Well, by the nature of what you're calling an axiom. I mean, if it wasn't universally the case, then it wouldn't hold in all places at all times in all worlds. So it'd be like arguing that the laws of logic are true here, but not tomorrow in China. I mean, it would be silly. It'd be self-defeating. They wouldn't be. They would lose their law-like character. They would no longer be laws.
Right, but isn't that the case that a lot of Darwinists make, which is that truth is only beneficial for survival, so it could be true now, but it might not be true in the future? Like, why couldn't you?
Okay, well, if they said that, then that proposition itself would be self-refuting, because that would mean that proposition, their very most foundational statement, is self-refuting. It could be false tomorrow.
Okay, I'm not quite understanding why the axiomatics to engage in debate must be universally true, but I don't want to waste your time.
So, hold on. Do you understand that the very thing that you just stated demonstrates the point? So, rephrase again what you said the atheist type of guy argues. Say it again.
That it could be true today, but not in the future? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, do you not understand that proposition itself has to universally be the case for that position to hold, but that itself is self-refuting?
I suppose if you're talking about something as foundational as the laws of logic,
yeah. No, you're missing the point. The phrase itself, you're not getting what I'm saying?
I guess not, but I don't want to waste your time.
No, I don't want to move away from it because this is the heart of precept. So do you understand that? Let's take the sentence. It could be true today and not tomorrow. That sentence. Do you think that sentence has a truth value? Does that proposition have a truth value?
Yes.
Okay.
It is making a truth claim.
Right. And if that truth claim is subsumed under the meaning of the claim itself, then that truth claim itself can be not true tomorrow, and it's self-defeating.
Okay.
You don't understand that? This thing itself, this right here. So in other words, the person making this argument doesn't realize that they have this as their dogmatic presupposition that they don't even see is impossible to hold. Because if you admit that this position could be false in the next 5 minutes, it's self-refuting.
Okay. So that makes sense. I feel like I get precept now, but like why does logical laws have to exist in a divine mind? Like why are these universals mind dependent?
Well, because number one, what are they, where are they, how are they, and what is the reason that we have to believe in them? And you can't just say, well, they just are. Okay, just are what? Just are where? Just are how? Right? So just saying that they are is in no way giving an account for them. If I believe in a Christian paradigm and worldview, then it actually makes sense why there would be universals, because we have a divine mind who's omniscient, has intentionality, meaning that he creates a world with purpose, meaning that these things have meaning and purpose. If the world has no purpose, which the word there is dysteleological, then none of these things actually have any meaning, because they don't have any ultimate reference point, right? They might just be here today and gone tomorrow. So if you have a world that's designed with telos and with order and with structure and with meaning, then it makes sense why you would be able to ground it in what's called divine conceptualism, that these entities, these objects have to be, and they don't exist on their own, right? Because they don't exist in a vacuum. Like universals relate to mathematics, to numbers, to the laws of logic. All those things relate to one another. Okay, well, where are they? Well, what's going to string this golden pearl string together? Well, we need some kind of being with an omniscient mind and who's all powerful and in all places at all times. That is the thing that grounds and holds these things together. In the same way that your mind houses and stores a whole bunch of things, concepts, meanings, right, in one immaterial thing.
Okay, so I see that you're pointing out that the atheist doesn't have a justification of where they are, but just because your opponent can't explain it yet, that doesn't necessarily logically.
It's not even that. It's not even that they can't explain it. It's that their whole worldview actually makes knowledge impossible. It's an even stronger claim than just not being able to explain it. It's that if their position were true, knowledge would be impossible.
Okay, but like, why does it not logically necessarily follow that it's a mind and not something else that they're grounded in?
Well, I mean, if you want to come up with something, you could posit something else, but I mean, there's nothing else that we know of other than by the analogy of the human mind to make like the mind, the conceptualist analogy that I made, right? Like your mind houses a bunch of concepts, a bunch of ideas, a bunch of meaning. And so divine revelation tells us that God has a mind. Our minds are made in the image of God's mind. And God's mind works in an analogous way, but not in a one-to-one correspondence way, because God's thoughts are infinitely above our thoughts. But divine revelation tells us that the principle of the Logos is the very thing that gives us that metaphysical unity that we're seeking for. And it's not just an impersonal force, it's a personal God who creates with meaning and intentionality. So the point is that the Christian worldview as a whole, in terms of the total revelation of who God is and what history is and who man is, etc., that is a grounding and a holistic account that makes sense of how there can be these things. It doesn't give you an exhaustive explanation for everything, but no worldview can do that. But it does give you an account for how knowledge is possible. And the point is that when you contrast that worldview to the atheist worldview, the materialist worldview, not only is it not able to give an account, it actually makes knowledge impossible.
Okay, I'll look in to see if any atheist has even provided some explanation as to grounding for universals. But I would be curious as to, like, when you say that the only thing we've seen is that we only, like, experience concepts being in our mind.
Well, it's not just that, though. I mean, there's other aspects to this. Like, there's the problem of the one and the many, which we would say is resolved via the Trinity. There's the, objectivity of ethics that we think is grounded in a personal, living, holy, eternal God versus no basis for ethics in an atheist worldview. So I was just focusing on the metaphysics, but it's not like the whole argument hinges on universals. There's also the epistemic element and the ethical element, because our argument, our view, is that all of these things hang and fall together. In other words, every metaphysical claim that you believe in or think that you know is also, by extension, a knowledge claim. And by the way, any metaphysic is also necessarily part of an ethical claim. Because, for example, to say that there is the good, you could say, well, that's ethics. Oh, but wait a minute. The good, if we're talking metaphysics, is also a metaphysical claim. And if I claim to know what the good is, then I've now gone into all three domains of philosophy with just talking about the good. So in other words, all of those things go together, and the transcendental argument is not hinging just on metaphysics. You might hear me use that angle a lot, like if I'm arguing with the dude the other night who was talking about he wanted to have universal ethics, but he didn't believe in universals. And I'm like, how's that possible? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. So to answer your point about atheists, though, most atheists don't believe in universals. So they're going to out of hand reject the existence of universals.
Mm-hmm. So I get that your whole paradigm, like, supports these other things. You can still hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I get that, like, your paradigm also solves the problem of the one and the many, but I'm still not understanding how it's not empiricist in nature to say that because we only experience concepts in our own mind, that a divine mind must be the only thing that can ground them. Because I feel like for this, like, specific argument to be logically sound from start to finish as, like, a definite proof, you have to assert that these universals can only be grounded in a mind, because otherwise you're not excluding all other possible worldviews.
Well, I mean, again, it's not just the question of where do you ground the universals, because universals don't stand alone. Like I said, it's also the question of, for example, you couldn't have a coherent worldview without having a notion of telos and a notion of causation. So causation and teleology are just as important as universals. They're not identical to them, but they're metaphysical categories that are absolutely necessary to the possibility of knowledge at all. So even though I might focus on one thing like universals, like there's these other things too that are just as necessary and just as fundamental to even having knowledge at all. And those things can't be just asserted to arbitrarily be. How are they? Where are they? What are they? And the divine mind from divine revelation is what grounds those things for us. So in other words, there's not going to be an exhaustive, perfect definition or explanation of every one of these things. There is an account for how they are. And contrasted to the other position, you don't have to know all the other worldviews, because there's not actually an infinite number of worldviews that can even give accounts for those things. Giving an account is not telling a story. Giving an account is making it work. You see what I'm saying? That's different than just saying, because I mean, if somebody could just say, well, there are these little gnomes, and they exist inside of every object, and their job is to project. The meaning of the object into my mind, and even though we don't see them, well, look, that makes it work. So here's a great story about the little gnomes inside the objects that project the meaning to my mind. Well, little gnomes can't unify the meaning of these things because they're a bunch of little gnomes, right? So, and plus, we don't really have any basis to think that there are little gnomes inside of objects. But anyway, what was your question about empiricism? I got off track there with the gnomes. But.
Yeah, so I was just asking, like, if you're saying that to ground, to make the claim that God must exist because universals must be grounded in a divine mind, you must make the claim that these concepts have to exist outside your mind, but that's based on sense experience.
Yeah, but it's not okay. But
concept in your mind.
No, it's not just based on sense experience. It's based on, first of all, like what those objects themselves are. I mean, they're abstract, immaterial, invariant things. Okay, like the number 7 can't just be an object in my mind because. Like where in my head is the number 7 that's identical to the number 7 in your head. And if something like a law of logic or even a law of nature, like you can't say that they're just in the mind, the human mind, because they would no longer be law-like if they were just reduced to gray matter. Mm-hmm. You're no longer talking about a law anymore if they don't have some sort of universal quality to them.
Yeah, I get how the claim necessarily follows that they must exist outside of the human mind, but I don't understand how it necessarily follows that the thing they must exist in that is divine is mind-like. Like, why does it have to be a mind?
Because the only way that... So if you look at the argument that Lyle makes in his book, Ultimate Proof, the 2nd chapter, which is about information science, he makes a great point that all meaningful information that we've ever known of or ever experienced, it always originates in some mind with purpose and intentionality. So there's no such thing as a mind that doesn't have some person directing that meaningful action or meaning. Does that make sense?
Right. So you just made the claim, though, that whenever we experience information that's meaningful, it always comes from a mind. So isn't that an empiricist claim to say that because we...
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, this is called a category error, right? So it doesn't matter like whether I'm appealing to... Like I could start the transcendental argument from a pencil. It doesn't mean that I think pencils have metaphysical or epistemic priority just because I begin my argument from them. So you're thinking that because I appeal to something like reasoning or logic or whatever, that gives them epistemic priority or that means empiricism is true? No. I can make an argument for God's existence from empirical knowledge. That does not make me an empiricist, nor does it mean that the knowledge is self-evident or in some way not theory-laden. That's a category error.
Okay. I don't quite understand why it's not considered to be self-evident if it's necessary to assume something based off of sense data.
Because that's not what self-evidence means. Self-evidence is a notion in foundationalist epistemology that there are fundamental axioms that are not circular and don't require any other things to back them up. And when you hear me say that there's nothing that is a brute fact, and when I say everything is theory-laden, that is me rejecting that.
Okay. All right.
So in other words, if I start my argument from the pen, it doesn't mean that I believe pens are self-evident or that they're not theory-laden. Because I can start the argument from anything. I could say that the existence of monkeys requires the triune God. That wouldn't make monkeys self-evident. It wouldn't make... It's just because where I start my argument has nothing to do with what I think has... necessarily what I think has epistemic or metaphysical priority. Like the number 1, it's the first in an ordinal sequence. It doesn't have more number than the number 2.
Yeah.
Okay, so that would be a category error to think that, well, the number 1 is first, so it's more number than the number 2.
Okay.
If I make an argument for God's existence from ethics, and I start with ethical claims, I'm just picking something within my paradigm to start from. But that doesn't mean that I'm denying that my entire paradigm is a web of beliefs which are all interconnected with one another. So this is called epistemic holism, and it's contrasted to something like foundationalism or the notion of self-evidence, which again I don't think exists.
Oh, okay. That sentence just made it all come together for me. I totally get it now. Thank you so much.
So think about your worldview the way I see it. Think about your worldview like a book, right? And, something maybe like the Bible even, something that's like a complex, holistic book. And you can go to parts of the book, but really the parts assume the whole, right? And they only make sense in regard to the whole book, right?
Yeah.
So even though I'm picking certain parts of the book, I'm starting with Joshua, right? That doesn't mean that if I start with Joshua, that I think Joshua is more Bible than, Matthew or Genesis. It's all Bible, but I'm picking somewhere to start with telling the story of the Bible.
Okay, yeah.
And the whole thing is theory laden, right? Like literally Deuteronomy makes no sense without, all the other parts. It's all theory. It's embedded within a giant network.
Yeah. Well, you responded to all three of the objections very well. I think I get it a lot better now, and I probably wouldn't be attending an Orthodox church without your YouTube channel, so thank you very, very much.
Absolutely. Anytime, Beacon. I appreciate your patience, and those were good questions.